Okay, guys, first of all, Spadia is not just a YouTube channel. We have also digital products, physical products, which are going to help you about everything we talk about in these videos. You can find two links in the descriptions below. And now let's get back to the video you came here to actually watch.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about optimizing your circadian rhythm and basically optimizing your sleep as well. And we'll be talking about also especially some tools that you can use to optimize your morning behavior and also your evening behavior as well, especially related to the circadian clock and your sleeping patterns as well. Now, just to basically mention is that if there is any one area that you would like to learn the most about, and if this is basically the start for you in terms of learning more about also neuroscience overall, but also about how your own mind and body works, I think sleep is pretty much the best area either you want to start, but also second to master, as it's basically the biggest area that affects your own behavior, basically mood, and also your own performance throughout the day. And basically the effects that you will get from learning the most about sleep, and especially circadian clock, are basically the largest that you will get. So I think it's very, very important to get this as a foundation overall. Now, of course, there is a lot more information, but I've tried to make this into basically one video which should be able to get you into the basics overall. Now, just to dive straight into it, there are basically three main things that we need to talk about that to affect your circadian clock the most and basically in turn your sleep. And one of them, which I will try to relate into your own life already, that you may have noticed, is your body's temperature. Now, your body's temperature has to decrease by around, let's say, on average 1 to 3 degrees before you're able to fall asleep. And this is why, for example, usually, or it's basically the standard that the bedrooms in homes have usually lower temperature compared to other rooms in your house, as your body temperature basically needs to be lower than it was before. Of course, your basically mind does it automatically, but you can also try yourself that if you are, for example, trying to increase temperature in your bedroom, it will be much harder overall for you to fall asleep than if you didn't try that. So basically this is a huge thing that affects your own ability to fall asleep, but also your own sleep. And then in turn, you can also think about the fact that basically the opposite of that also has to be true. That is true, especially when you have to wake up, is that your body's temperature basically does increase in a couple of hours before you actually wake up. And in turn, when that happens, that your body's temperature does increase, and that in turn also sets in motion some other things, for example, increases in so-called stress hormone cortisol, although it's not just a stress hormone, let's say, per se, as it's not just, let's say, something that basically makes you stressed, but it's also very important in other functions, for example, making you want to actually move out of the bed, or even controlling your immune response as well, which are very, very beneficial things overall. Also, there are some other tools basically you can use thanks to that, is that when you know that you probably need to actually decrease your temperature towards the end of the day, in order for you to fall asleep much more easily, and if you know that you need to increase your temperature in the morning for you to be able to actually start up your day well, I think there are some basically very, very good tools that you can use in order to achieve any of those effects. And all of them, which would probably make the most sense, is alternating the temperature of shower, for example, or even doing, for example, cold exposure in the morning as well, is just by the effect that if you are able to get into, for example, cold shower or into a cold bath in the morning, your own body basically needs to increase your core temperature in order to keep up basically with this cold exposure, and that will all allow you to basically wake up quite a bit fast. If you've ever done cold exposure, you know what I am talking about already, but this is especially why some of the effects, it also increases your adrenaline in the moment as well, and it basically gets you amped up for the day quite a bit. But there are also these increases in temperature that, especially if you do it in the morning, will help you to basically get one amped up for the day, but it also set in motion a huge amount of different systems related to the circadian clock that will help you to basically improve your mood. Also thanks to some increases of dopamine as well, which we throughout the day, but will especially help you to basically regulate quite a lot of hormones as well. Now the converse or the opposite also applies, that if you would like to fall asleep much more easily, then taking cold shower in the evening is not the best choice, but you can basically take hot showers instead, which will then basically ensure that your body will have to decrease your body's temperature overall in order to basically accommodate the hot shower exposure that you've done, and in that end it will help you to basically fall asleep much more easily as well. So basically try to use those tools to whatever kind of timing in the evening or in the morning you would like to use. Now the second thing, which we not just talk about temperature and is even more important, but I've tried to reserve it for the second spot, is light, and especially basically exposure to sunlight. And if you notice that I've especially mentioned sun as basically the most important, is that there's a huge difference in wavelengths from the sun compared to, for example, some overhead lamps which you might have at your home. And especially due to the fact that over the lots of years we've basically evolved based on the wavelengths of the light that we've basically taken in from the sun. And there's also a difference between the wavelengths that you're able to capture in the morning versus in the evening, which does regulate your circadian rhythm in terms of your effects it has on your own chemicals and hormones as well, but also in terms of preparing your body. For example, if you are able to see sun when it's going up in the morning, there are different effects on your mind and body compared to you viewing sun going down in the evening as well. Now, because of the sunlight effects, or how big those effects are on your circadian rhythm overall, it's basically very important thing you can use to at least get some sunlight exposure. It doesn't have to be a direct sunlight exposure to your eyes, but at least I would, at the minimum effort, I would encourage you to basically have your windows opened in the morning, as you at least need to get some photons into your eyes, not through the windows, as windows do filter the light that comes through them, but at least to have your windows opened and to get some photons into your eyes from the sun itself. Now, basically overall, if you do wake up quite a bit earlier, such as myself, maybe even a couple of hours before sun actually is on the horizon, what you can at least do is to basically turn on as many overhead lights as you can, which is going to help you get amped up for the at least a bit more, as it's basically much better than darkness. But then especially when you're able to then see that the sun is outside, that you are probably able to get some sunlight into your eyes, I would encourage you to at least get outside and to not work, for example, in the dark. Now, the third thing that is very important to mention that does regulate your circadian rhythm and also over your sleep is your food intake, and not just the volume of food intake, but also in overall the timing of when you eat food. And this is especially to the fact that there is a huge amount of molecules that your body has to use in order to one digest your food. Of course, we have talked about insulin quite a bit in some of the episodes, maybe not enough yet, and we will probably dedicate some separate videos to insulin in the future. But overall, the food intake, especially the timing that you use for eating your food, is very important. But I think even more important is the consistency of when you actually eat your food, as basically I've mentioned quite a bit of times in the previous videos as well, that your body tries to expect when you eat, for example, food in the mornings, or when you eat your basically overall food throughout the days, and it tries to already, for example, increase insulin a couple of minutes before you even try to eat your food, which is one of the examples how your body tries to predict certain things. And being consistent in that, in your food in intake especially helps, but also in terms of timing, in order for you to spend, let's say, less resources, let's say less energy, for your body to actually be able to predict when you eat that food well enough, but for it to actually control and help you with your own circadian rhythm and also your sleep quite a bit better. Now, there's one huge thing that does circumvent all of the things which I've mentioned, and is caffeine. And it's especially important to talk about it, as basically, I would say, the most used drug and the best marketed drug in the world. Now, of course, it's not to say that it's doing bad things overall, as it does help quite a bit with performance. It helps a lot of people with their mood as well. Of course, I'm basically just talking that it's a drug because it has overall addictive properties, as people have quite a lot of times mentioned that it's hard for them to get off caffeine immediately, which is also not something I do encourage for you to basically go cold turkey if you want to. But caffeine is basically something of a drug as well. But caffeine basically does circumvent quite a bit of things I've mentioned, because of the fact that caffeine works in a way that it docks in so-called receptors in your own brain, where otherwise so-called molecule adenosine will dock in, and adenosine is basically responsible for you actually feeling sleepy into the evening overall. But you can also basically see that if caffeine docks in the same so-called receptors, where adenosine tries to dock in. It basically makes you less sleepy, which is basically how caffeine overall works. And it's also one of the reasons that when actually caffeine wears off after a couple of hours, you usually experience some kind of a crash, because basically adenosine itself builds up in your system, and when caffeine actually wears off, it then docks into those same receptors, and there is even more adenosine than before. So you can basically expect to have some kind of a crash after that. This is why it basically circumvents that, because it basically blocks you from actually getting the signal of having adenosine in your own brain. But it's especially important to relate that to the fact that if you truly need to, for example, stay up, then caffeine works in this way, where I would basically encourage you to basically not take it at least a maximum of 10 hours before you're actually going to sleep, because then you basically probably won't be able to actually fall asleep, which again is going to probably break your consistency in your sleep pattern, but it can also impact then your circadian clock as well. But it's especially important to dive into the fact that if you are in the need of, for example, staying up later, then caffeine will 100% help by basically blocking adenosine docking in the same receptors overall. Now, there's one more thing which I want to mention outside of these three things, that overall one of the things that helps you to also regulate mostly your temperature but circadian clock is also some form of exercise. And based on the overall literature that we have, it seems that weightlifting especially, or some kind of strongman lifts for example, help quite the most with this. Is that basically weightlifting regulates your body's temperature as well, and in turn also your circadian rhythm overall. And that is also something, let's say, of a tool that you can use, as basically the way weightlifting does increase your temperature, that increases it to go up. So basically you can use it also in the mornings, especially as if you basically need to get amped up for the day as well. Even I will mention that if you do train very hard, you will be quite a lot more tired after your particular exercise session, but it is usually mostly true when you, for example, get into a completely new exercise routine where you need to get used to it. But especially with relation to the fact that exercise overall does increase your body temperature for a couple of hours after you do it. It's also one of those that you can use basically to regulate your own body temperature throughout the day, and then in turn to regulate your own circadian clock overall. Now, hopefully this video has been helpful. If you will have any questions, since we've discussed quite a bit about the circadian clock and then in turn also how it affects your sleep, and some tools that you could use basically related to light, temperature, and also food intake as well. If you will have any questions, you can also pop them down in the comments below, or if you would like to talk about any of your own experiences, you can also pop them down below as well. Thanks guys!